Hey, what's up? Welcome to Project Freelance. If this is your first time hearing my voice, what is up? My name is Kay Anagonio, and I am your host on this podcast where every week I bring you a different guest to talk about how they forged their path as a freelancer. So this week on the podcast, I am talking with my friend Lisa. She is also known as Lisa Ann. If you have never heard that name, you probably have never seen an adult film before. She's like the third most Googled woman in the world, and she retired a couple years ago from the adult film industry, and now she is a fantasy sports radio show host with SiriusXM in New York City. And I wanted to have her come on the podcast to share her insights of how she grew as a freelancer in the adult film world. Not only that, but she also does a lot of give back stuff. She is an activist. She gives back to charity. She does all these amazing events for autism. And I look up to her so much as a human being, as a person, as a businesswoman. This lady, let me tell you, she is absolutely incredible. I have gotten to work with her over the past couple of years. We've traveled together a lot. We went to Alaska. I created a whole Alaska web series for her of her travels. We went dog sledding. We rode in a helicopter. We did all kinds of crazy stuff. And I'm super grateful for my time that I've gotten to spend with her and get to know her. And what better way to ask her more questions about how she made her livelihood other than on an episode of Project Freelance. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode, but before we get into it, I have to let you know that I have a book out called No Tracers, An Urban Explorer's Diary, and it is a book about all of my explorations into abandoned places. So if you are into high-res photography of abandoned places and crazy stories of how we got in, how we got out, the things we saw inside, definitely head to justtheletterk.com/no tracers and pick up a copy of my book. But not only do I have a book, Lisa has a book, and she's also working on another book, and then she's going to just keep writing books. So without further ado, let's get into this episode of Project Freelance and talk about all of these things with Lisa Ann. Hey, Lisa, can you please introduce yourself and what it is you do to the Project Freelance audience?
Hi, I'm Lisa Ann. I'm a freelancer. I've written my first book, working on my second. I do sports radio, formerly a well-known adult film star, and I love to create.
So how did you get into the adult film world? That was your first occupation as a freelancer. How did you get into that?
So my first step in was doing bikini contests, and at those bikini contests I met girls that worked at a strip club that helped me get fake ID, and they said, we'll get you fake ID, because I was 16 at the time. They're like, we'll get you a fake ID, you can work at the clubs. You had to be 18 to work at the clubs. And so I was still going to high school, and I would drive from Eastern Pennsylvania to Philadelphia and different places in New Jersey, and I would work like Thursday, Friday, Saturday at these clubs. Well, I really wanted to work at a club in Reading, but he had a much different format. You had to work 6 days a week. You had to work Monday, like let's say you worked Monday noon to 6. Tuesday you worked 6 to midnight. Wednesday you worked noon to 6. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every girl there worked noon to midnight. And that was how he did his schedule. And if you wanted a day off, you take a week off. So you would work like 3 weeks on, 1 week off. I really wanted to work this club because he also paid the girls an hourly wage. So the girls were making money. I went in there at first. There's no go with the fake ID. He's not falling for that. So as soon as I was 18, that's where I went. I went to Al's Diamond Cabaret, 19 years old. I finally went back there. Went to Al's Diamond Cabaret, and Al had feature dancers coming in every week. Feature dancers were adult film stars and magazine models, sometimes Playboy Playmates, and they would come in and they would be there from Monday to Saturday with us. And they would do like 4 or 5 shows a day, one at noon for the lunch crowd, one at 5 for like the dinner crowd, one at like 7, 9, 11. And so you got to know these girls that were coming through there. And of course, on my end of it, watching these girls and understanding that it's hard to work in a strip club around regular customers all the time. I learned that very quickly. There's a lot of fake emotions and a lot of fake relationships that start to build on one side of the stage, right? So here I am just trying to be a freelancer, just make my own money, just make my own life. And you get a little bit too close to people from seeing them every day. It wasn't a comfortable space for me. A lot of girls were very comfortable with it. They loved to talk to these guys. So they would really enjoy getting to know everything about their lives, their family, their kids. To me, I was just like, I just want to make my money and go home. You know what I mean? Like, that didn't make me comfortable. And especially when you live in the area where you work, you start to run into these people outside. It just made me, these girls got to come in once a year to our club, maybe twice a year. They were traveling the world whenever they wanted to go on a gig. They could go to New Jersey, to New York, California, to Florida. And I was like, this must be awesome. These girls are doing exactly what I'm doing. They're getting paid so much more money than I am. They're getting their travel covered. They're traveling. They're seeing different things. How do I become one of these girls? So I started to sit down with the girls that would come into the club as features, and I interviewed them for over a period of about 2 years. Some girls were very friendly. Some girls would write to me by mail. Some girls gave me contacts of people in California. Some girls didn't talk at all, right? That's just normal. So from that study, now remember, this was, you're saying like 1990. From that time, we didn't have the internet. So when I started doing this, it was about getting a photographer to shoot photos of me, which I had to hire, getting them printed, and then sending them by mail to California and hoping that somebody would open them and call me. So this was a lengthy process because it wasn't as quick, fast as it is now. And finally, through one of the girls, I met a man named Peter Davey. And Peter Davey would take a couple of girls under his wing. And I'm sure that we never talked about it, but I'm pretty sure that he probably got a commission to take these girls around and meet people. But whatever, he was a great guy. He was never creepy. I completely trusted him because of the girl that told me. So I bought a one-way ticket. I flew out there. Peter Davey picked me up at the airport, and I stayed with him until I got a contract with my first company. And when I went out there, my mindset was this: I want to shoot minimal amount, to have a contract, to be on the box covers, to have promotional materials through the company, to be sent out to the club so I could feature dance. My focus was always feature dancing more than it was shooting movies. I liked being on the road. I liked the gypsy lifestyle. I liked the cash factor of tips. I liked seeing somewhere different every week. And if I liked it, great. If I didn't, it didn't matter. That was a really way I thought about it. And LA was where I had to be in the business, but I knew I wasn't really an LA person. So I lived in Huntington Beach for my first 15 years in the business, and I would just shoot one movie a month. So I only needed to drive to the Valley, for like 4 days. I would stay in a hotel and make it a trip, and I wouldn't go back there for anything. And it was such a great way to get to see the beauty in California. Take a drive, you go south, you go down to Laguna, like everything from Huntington Beach south is so beautiful. And I loved living down there. And so really the start for me was being a stripper, meeting the porn stars, doing the homework, getting to California, and then getting back out on the road as a dancer. But that really enabled me to do so many more things, because as time progressed and we reached the mid 2000s and we're discussing the internet, and then the later 2000s when we started to have more social media than just MySpace. And I realized, like, wow, with the adult content being one of the biggest driving forces in the whole entire world of the internet, here I have the opportunity to have a brand that can push so many other things down the road. At that time, not knowing what those things would be, but understanding the value that being in the time and place that I was, and social media just starting, and it was so easy to see content on the internet. We're more well known than ever, which enabled me to mark my rate up on the road, which taught me to learn about the value of the analytics of social media, so I could use that as a pitch to the clubs when I was asking for more money, or to people I was shooting for when I later was asking for more money. And it really worked in my benefit to be in at kind of that start gate of time.
And so what was that learning curve like for you when the internet really started to blossom when it comes to adult films? I mean, things like Pornhub, there's all these different websites out there, and building your brand. What was that like to do in the new age of the internet?
It was interesting because being in the industry, who was very against Pornhub, because of course you understand that these are tube sites that don't charge and steal content from other people. But for some reason, I had a different outlook on that. I mean, I looked at it as like music. You're looking at bands that are going on the road more than ever because more people are listening. They can fill more concerts and they can do more things. They have already understood, oh, we're not going to make money off of this initial drop of our music. Like, that's just the new world, right? It's just how it is now. And though everyone really hemmed and hawed about it, I mean, the industry was so anti, and there were companies that Pornhub that later purchased with different names that were starting to shoot, and people want to shoot for them. And everybody was so hatred to it. Here I was, again, remembering that I wanted to be on the road more than I wanted to be shooting movies. So to me, right away, I was like, I don't care. I just got an extra 500,000 Twitter followers without doing a thing that I would have never gotten if they wouldn't have your profile up on Pornhub. I mean, let's be real. And so I looked at it as, I'm not going to, I read that book, Who Moved My Cheese, many years ago. It's called Who Moved My Cheese. It's like an 80-page book, and it's so basic, but it's so real. It's about three mice. Somebody moves the cheese, and how do three different mice handle it? There's always that one mouse in the back just hems and haws and does nothing. There's the other one that's complaining for a while and then starts to look. And then there's me. I'm searching for that new cheese right away. I'm going to get that cheese. And so when Pornhub started, I was really able to get more valuable work on the road where I was actually making money. I was able to start to realize that how much you marketed your events, it opened up to more people that didn't even know about the club were coming in to see me. I realized I had just as much pull, if not more, than the venue. So that was a very rewarding feeling. To me, it was like, hey, more people know us than ever. I'm capitalizing on that.
Yeah. And what was it like to go from, stardom to being one of the most searched women on the internet?
It was, it's kind of a weird thing to process for yourself because you know me personally. And to me, my work thing is totally different thing than my me thing, who I am as myself. So the accolades were interesting to me, never something that drove me or my ego in one direction or another. It just really helped me know my worth. And I really looked at it in a business sense as if this is a marketing tool and I should be using this when communicating with the people that matter most, whether it's the clubs or the companies that I want to charge more money to. And I should be not looking at it in any sort of personal or ego shape of way because it can change at any time. So I just continue to push. And I think pushing forward and seeing that value in yourself, you can carry that to any business. You could do one thing. Just knowing your value really changes how you use your time, who you deal with and who you don't. It changes everything. And so that really helped me know my value in that workspace. And then when I decided I wanted to try to pivot and see what else is out there for me, I had to stop again and think, how can I use that again to my value? Like, how can I use this in any walk of life to say most searched on the internet? That still is one word, two words, drives traffic. And that's really what this whole world is based on right now, driving traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk a lot on this podcast about finding your value and your worth. How long did it take you to get to a rate you were happy with getting paid?
I mean, for the amount, I'm a very grateful person. So for a long time, I probably, was happy with the money that I was making. But I would say when Palin happened, when I did the Who's Nailin' Palin series for Larry Flint, Hustler Movies, that changed everything because as soon as I shot the first Palin was the very first movie in the industry where there was about 65 people from mainstream media there that wanted to be on set live, E! Channel and TMZ and people that never did this before. And so right there, pow, more branding. And then shortly thereafter, getting the call to be in an Eminem video. Are you kidding me? I remember pretty much, I never liked my dance agent. He knows this. He was not a good person. He didn't want us to know our value. They have a very, I'll say, pimp-like mentality in this business. That I could be winning every award and still the number one girl, and he'd still be talking me down on my rate because they want the accounts more than they want the girls. They look at the girls as disposable, and they look at the accounts as the value, whereas there should be a better balance of that. But I remember calling him that day, the day I got the call for the Palin video with Eminem, and really just finally chewing him out and saying, this is how it's going to be now. I'm going to get 2 hotel rooms and 2 flights because I had to take security with me at that time. And he was still insisting I shared a hotel room. You know what? We're gone for 4 days, man. You just need your own space sometimes. And these were little things. And I told him, if you don't do it, I'll call all the clubs to do it for you. And then you're going to look like a fool. It was the first time. And I let it boil up inside me until I was nasty about it. But it hit me at that point. Like, if you don't stomp this right now, you're going to be in an Eminem video, girl. Like, you need to take the reins here. If you allow one more nudge of you devaluing yourself as a freelancer, it's going to go on forever, because this is your peak right now. This is your peak in marketing in this time. And I knew it at that moment. And I did it. And, a lot of the clubs I reached out to on my own, said, this is my rate now. And I said, if my agent didn't ask you for it, then you're going to pay me that separate, and he's not getting commission on it. And that's how it's going to go down. Because at this point forward, I know my value now. So that was something that really propelled me. And I think in this new world, I decided to now have this completely different second act in my life, which I'm enjoying on a whole new level with so many new emotions attached to it, is doing fantasy sports for Sirius XM. And I'm always now kind of, when you start something new, you kind of feel like you're at that start gate again, where you're insecure and you're always worried about my pronunciation with athletes' names, because there's so many athletes from different countries that have incredible names that I'll listen to them say it themselves on their social media like 1,000 times so I don't mess it up. Like, there's something great about that, because I went from being the best at what I did and being able to demand more money than anybody ever thought, to kind of starting at scratch and not sure if I'm going to do well enough to keep this position. And I like the hunger that created in me again. I like that feeling of starting at the bottom and really wanting to be better. I have a list of hosts on different networks that I listen to every day, because I love how maybe they tease before a break. I love how they continuously announce a guest, and I want to make that habit for myself. I love how clearly they remind people about going back and listening on demand. Like, I'm constantly looking at every day like a school day, and I find a thrill in that. So it's been cool to go to that point where I knew my value, to kind of a point where I'm a little bit insecure about my value. And it's keeping me just striving and working harder and being committed. And that's where I need to be. And I'm enjoying that struggle all over again.
Definitely. And so let's talk a little bit about the activism work you do. You've done a lot of work, and you've helped a lot of people in the adult film industry. Can you just talk about some of the things that you've done and some of the projects you've been a part of?
So one of my main grievances with the industry as a sane-minded person was always the testing systems, and always learning more about the healthcare, things that are changing, viruses, STDs that are having treatment problems in other countries, things being brought over to the U.S., how we're testing for HIV, whether we're testing for syphilis, whether we're testing for hepatitis. When I first got into business, we were tested once a month, and there was one place that did it, and the place looked like something out of a horror movie. Okay. It was like the last place you ever wanted to walk into. And because we had no computers, you had to go twice, because you had to drive back there and pick up your test. And at that time, it was only the ELISA blot, and it would come back. For a while, it was a couple days, and it came back in an hour. And believe me, when it came back in an hour, I was so afraid of that test, I didn't trust it at all. But at that time, that was all you had to do, and you had to carry this piece of paper with you that had a certificate on it. And of course, a lot of the male performers would fold it up and they'd put it in their pocket, and it'd get washed up and wrinkled, and you couldn't really read their name. And there's a great documentary on Showtime about porn, and it talks about the Mark Wallace situation. And there was a time where he was HIV positive and knew it and was faking his test, and that was 1997. And that scared me right out of the business. I went on a hiatus around that time until 2005. And it was because the internet and the fact that tests were now available online, and there was no way for someone to Mickey their test. And so we started there. When I came back in 2009, they were testing a different type of HIV test. They were testing for gonorrhea, chlamydia, and other STDs that there was no care to test for in the 90s. You either had it and had to get medicated, or that was it. So things had evolved, but there were still some gray areas in our testing system, and they were areas that I really wanted to improve. And one of them came at a tough time in 2013. It's something that I wrote about in my book, but there was talk in the industry that somebody had syphilis. And to me, there's one thing that I always had a tough time with the industry is its lack of willingness to communicate on a more professional manner. People would just be like, hey, I hear somebody has syphilis. Well, like, okay, do we want to go to this state and shut down the business and test everyone for syphilis? Like, what the fuck are we talking about this for on set? It's kind of where I would go with them. Well, we don't know who has it yet. So about 6 months into this went on for 6 months. 6 months into this, it hits me, and it hits me weirdly. I was telling you about Al's Diamond Cabaret. I was doing a feature show at Al's Diamond Cabaret. I was on stage, and it hit me, I know who this fucker is. Because I've been trying to book him for my website for months, and he will never work with me. And it has to be him. And so as soon as I got done on stage that night, I went back to my hotel room, and I called him, and I'm like, do you have syphilis? And he's like, yes, I do. I lost my mind, and at the same time, it broke my heart because I had known him for a very long time. His name was Mr. Marcus, and I was upset and mad with him, but I also didn't want to hurt him so that he hurt himself. You don't know how devastated somebody is, but he did know he had it. He did go to a testing doctor outside of the industry. He did medicate, but it was still contagious. It's treatable, not curable. And so at that point, I had to tell him that I was going to call him out, and I was going to demand we shut down for 30 to 90 days. Get everyone tested, go through this. That's the protocol. So this happened around the same time this happened. We get back to work, and somebody comes on set to me and says, hey, so-and-so has hepatitis. And I realized, wow, why are we not testing for hepatitis? Oh, and by the way, after the Mr. Marcus situation, syphilis was added onto our tests. It wasn't a once a year thing. It became a monthly thing. You're now getting tested for syphilis as well. Now we realize we are not testing for hepatitis, and so, but we know who this person is. And the guy that said it to me on set, we were just getting ready to do a scene together. Like, why would you want to talk to me about this before a scene? But we're just getting ready to do a scene. And he's like, well, I know you really don't work with him because he works, every business is the same. There's like A-list actors and actresses. There's like B-list. So there's also A-list companies, B-list companies, C-list companies. It's like, oh, and he works for these guys. You would never work for these guys. They'd never pay your rate, that kind of a thing. And I'm like, yeah, but you could have worked with him yesterday through the girl that you worked with the day before. Like, doesn't anyone see the potential of the spreadability of something like this when a girl could do a gangbang and work with 8 guys, and now you work with that girl, and one of those 8 guys was that guy? Like, you can't just talk about this. You have to do something about this. So again, I'm the only person in the business that has ever been willing, because I've saved my money. And because feature dancing was always more my thing than shooting. And people hate me for that because they rely on shooting. But if you rely on shooting, nothing should be more important than your health. And if you can't save a couple of months' money so that we could take off and clean things like this up, then you don't care about your health. And that check-to-check mentality, I don't need to have empathy for. So I find out who the guy is. So I reach out to a company that I know that shoots him. And I'm like, hey, I want to shoot a scene with him. And they're like, oh, we can only pay you this much. That's okay, I'll take it. So I reach out to him. Now, one of the things I always did in the industry was I kept my credit card down at both testing centers. And before my scenes, we do a 24-hour test. I would pay for the guy to go get a fresh test. Fingers crossed he didn't do anything wild that night. His test comes back in the morning. We're fine. And we go to work. And the guys liked it because at that time, we were testing once a month, and a lot of times I'd book them around when their test was almost going to expire and save them the money of having to pay the $160 for their test, right? It's the right thing to do. We now test every 2 weeks. So I reached out to the guy, and I said, hey, Alex, I'm going to be shooting with you. My credit card is down at these 2 testing centers. We were testing for hepatitis at that time. He was testing outside of the industry where somebody wouldn't test for hepatitis. So then I reached out to his agent, Derek, who, by the way, was just indicted last week and had to turn himself in. I know you remember May of 2018, I worked very hard for a year with a producer on a documentary to try to get this man, Derek Hay from LA Direct Models, out of the industry. He hurt many young people. He misled and took advantage of naive minds and women who wanted to make money and really used and abused them. And now he's finally going down for it. So sidebar to that pleasure, I reached out to him and said, so, Alex has hepatitis and you're letting him test outside and you're not letting him work with any of your girls, right? And he's like, well, that's more close to his house. And I said, well, if he's going to work with me, he's going to have to go to the 1 testing centers in the industry, which are those 2, and he's going to have to get tested for hepatitis. And if he doesn't do that, then I'm going to take this whole interaction public. I'll go and put this on the internet, and we'll discuss this in an open forum. The state will shut down the business for 30 to 90 days. They didn't come forward, of course. I had to shut down the business again. This was now the 2nd time in a year. And then we went through 4 positive HIV in 1 month following. So that was a really tough year for the industry and a really tough year for anyone like myself who was eyeing up retirement, which I did in 2014, and was realizing that I'm taking a risk with my health by being around irresponsible people, but that I will always keep myself on the passport and I will always be present when it comes to testing decisions, which I made another change just 6 months ago on the board because I did go back to the business for a year, and now I've stepped aside and want to really try and work more with the state and work more with people, communicating with people to understand what goes on in our industry, to just legitimize the fact that girls can make a great brand for themselves, they can make money, they can save money, they can get a jump start in their life like no other walk of life, but we can't have people in there abusing them, taking advantage of them, not being honest about tests, et cetera, et cetera. So last year I found out that if you are medicating and you're HIV positive, once your viral load goes down to a number below what we test for, you could make it through our test system. And at that time, we had gotten a warning in the business that we might all want to go on PrEP. And PrEP is a prophylactic you can take daily that can help you in your interactions with somebody that is HIV positive. So I did research and interviewed some people that had taken PrEP and found out everything I needed to know, which is mainly PrEP is great if you're in a relationship with somebody that has HIV. But PrEP is not so good at being with multiple different partners because it lowers your immune system and it will make you more susceptible to catching gonorrhea, syphilis, and everything, and HPV over and over and over again, getting colds, getting flus, staph infections, which run rampant in the business, all of those things. So that was not a good option. I also didn't feel that it was smart for the industry to try to lean talent, young people, to take a pharmaceutical. And that was when I decided, okay, I'm going to get on the board and I'm going to really fight for this and have this voice of sanity. So what I did in a 6-month span of gathering votes and having these intense meetings was made us realize we need a double layer testing system. We now need to know the long term, a test that is like a blot format that would allow that person to test clean because they've been working on their meds and their viral load is low, and also a test on top of that tests for everything. You could be at a 0.1 viral load and it will still show on the test. So by getting doctors in the clinics involved and by getting them to agree to not charge more for the test, because this costs them more, I got the board on board as well. It's always changing. And so I think things can get very stagnant in a business where people are very money hungry and very, very selfish. And I think they're not realizing that with new medications and new things, you have to always be researching what we could be doing better to improve, how we can educate the younger people in the business more so that they can be healthier for longer. I mean, HIV is not a death sentence, but as young people would have to really have the finances and the insurance to be able to take care of themselves properly, that puts them in a really compromising position for a long time, the rest of their life. And so that's what I was always trying to prevent was, let's limit the potential risk here by learning every year how we can improve the testing protocol. And let's also stop gossiping on set about risk factors out there because they're in our world. They affect us all. Even though we may not work for the same companies that they work for, we're all one big unit. We're all one big family. We're all one entertainment group. And I felt it very selfish and short-sighted that people were not willing to have the business shut down. So I threw myself into that, and it's something I'm very, very proud of. And still people come to me and talk to me about certain things, and I'm always open and receptive to sharing my concerns or sharing, I think there's still and always room for improvement.
And what was it like for you to, start your own production company? Essentially, you started doing shoots that you coordinated, that you came up with. What was that like for you to go from, say, being under somebody else's beck and call to creating your own content?
I loved it. I loved producing and directing my movies. I loved everything from pairing up my talent by asking them who their favorite people are to work for, and then to try to do the logistics and see when their schedule would sync up and it would just be perfect. I loved everything from stylizing the locations and the wardrobe and knowing what kind of snacks. I loved knowing what I knew from being a performer and how I could make just the easiest, stress-free, enjoyable pleasant day for everyone. And I knew that's really how you're going to get an optimal sex scene. That's really how you're going to get optimal photos. When a girl feels good, she looks better. When she looks better, she projects and she radiates more sexuality. And the guys come in and you feel the same energy when the guy comes into the location and first sits down for the first time. I love knowing that there's so much more than just putting a scene together. And with companies that book producers and they type out a script and they type out exactly what they want and they have this thing, they're missing the whole point. They're missing the fact that these are two human beings that need to sexually connect and interact. And really the most important part of that day is them. And them enjoying it so we can be projecting something beautiful and real, unlike so much of the fake stuff that's just put out there just because they're telling someone exactly what to do. Not every girl has the same working body where certain positions would feel good or not good for her. So I always felt it was up to the performer to choose the positions, whereas when I worked for someone else, they would tell me exactly. We want 6 minutes in this exact position. It has to look like this photo. We want 6 minutes in this exact, and it was weird because it was like, there's one thing to storyboard something, but like some of them don't even transition. They're awkward. Like, it's like, okay, well, like, can we do the math? How does this 2 + 2 equal this? Like, how do we get from there to there? You know, you don't want to cut, you want to try and make it fluid. People don't cut in their bedroom. They don't stop and relight the room. They just roll over, So I really it pleased me to just create a good environment for the day. There's so many not great environments in the adult business. Any workforce, not everybody puts a good package together, right? I'll say now, that's made me appreciate the people that I work for now, probably more than I ever would if I would have started my life in this world, because I worked for so many people that I didn't think valued the human experience and treated people well. Whereas now I get a thank you from my boss every time I see him. I get the accolades through emails about certain shows and things that they're really liking that I'm working on. You're constantly growing. There's no growing in a place where everyone's just telling you what they need you to do. There's no growing. You're not being creative at all.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's talk about your transition to radio, to working for Sirius. When did you decide to, retire? I mean, you already mentioned it, but tell me about your retirement from the adult film industry and your pivot into this new line of work.
So I actually pivoted into this new line of work before I retired from the industry. I wanted to have some sort of a job. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, you've got to have something going on. So in 2013, I was already doing a show for Playboy Radio in LA, at the LA studios. And that show was actually a fun show, but it was Monday night, and it was during the Monday night football game. So I'll get back to why that matters, but first must tell you about the show. The show was called Stripper Town, and I would take calls from guys who had random strip club experiences, okay? So we got stories of, like, the girl was giving him a lap dance and she threw up on him. Like, there was all that kind of, like, getting hustled from the bouncer at the door. And I mean, every weekend guys go to these places. So all I needed was 10 good calls the show, and I also was on the road every weekend at that time, so I would tell my stories of random stuff that happened to me. So it was a really fun show, but because it was during football season, my fans who know me and knew that I'd be missing the game would call and, like, give me the score and tell me what was happening, if there were any injuries. And my producer at the time kept, like, getting after me. It was like, you really can't be talking sports. This is Playboy Radio, So he wrote me up. This was definitely an ongoing issue. They would screen the callers more. If a sports caller called in, they'd disconnect him when I was starting to get the score. Like, it was hilarious. So then on my very last, I think we're going to let you go. And there were a lot of other things that went down within that job. As a matter of fact, in that same studio, my producer let Mr. Marcus come in and have sex with 2 girls on air. And no one would have believed it was real, but some of the girls leaked out photos on the internet, and I had the photos, and I said, and this is a huge liability. This guy still has syphilis, and you don't know that these girls don't know that he has syphilis. Like, this was an issue. So it kind of sour grapes to my situation, because I called them out and again went to the press again, and it was owned by Playboy. It was not pleasant being called into a board meeting with like 12 lawyers and me the following day for calling them out. But it was, again, something I had to do. So we're having that awkwardness. I'm still working, but everybody from that show is fired, and I'm still talking sports. So perfect way to get rid of me. But as my guy was letting me go, Farrell, who was a wonderful man I still keep in touch with, he said, hey, my friend Matt Deutsch had 3 Playboy Playmates talking fantasy football, and the show did really, really well. The show has just broken up, and I think he's looking for something to fill that space. Do you know fantasy sports? I said, I don't know fantasy sports, but I know a lot of my friends that play it. And I pretty much know they're idiots and they do well at it. Like, how hard can this be, right? So I fly to New York that next week to meet with Matt Deutsch. He introduces me to my co-host, Adam, who I'm with on Monday nights. We do a test show together. And I was honest with him. I said, I don't really know fantasy sports. I'll learn it right away. I can talk football. I can talk basketball. We just did like a 15-minute segment, and we jived right away. And my boss was like, well, let's work on it. I had this summer to study fantasy football. I started doing drafts with the company in August. And then September 9th, 2013 was my very first show on Monday night, Lisa Anda's Fantasy. And I've been doing it ever since. And what I found was I loved it because it's so constant. There's so much interaction. It's so social. Like when you're in a draft room, there's a chat board. Chat rooms. So you can be like talking smack with people that you took a player they wanted or whatever. And then there's also those chat rooms inside all the applications to play fantasy sports. So on Sundays, I'm like laying on my couch, like I'm stalking people that I'm playing up against and chatting with them. I love how social it was because remember, when I left the business and after that terrible year of shutdowns, was not a fan favorite within people within the business. I'm a whistleblower. So nobody really likes me. And I have another gig, so they like me even less. So falling into something that was so social was like a Band-Aid when I felt like my life of 20 plus years was just taken away and nobody was going to talk to me anymore. Nobody kept in touch with me. I have one friend from the business that I talk to on a regular basis. His name's Christian. He's my only friend. Otherwise, I'll text out to try and say hello to people. They'll respond back, but nobody reaches out to me. So knowing that I had this new gig that was so social, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is going to be a great Band-Aid. It also kept me learning. I went from learning fantasy football to fantasy basketball to fantasy baseball. You're always studying the player depth. Player depth in baseball is incredibly deep, so you have to memorize a ton of players. And I like that, task work. It's like, okay, I'm going to take your cue cards with me today, and I'm going to memorize all the players. And sometimes I record all the players on a team, and then I go walk around the city, and I just memorize the entire lineup of the team, who's the first shortstop, who would be next in line, who's a designated hitter. It's a real mindscape for me. So it's been a transition that's taught me a lot about myself and what really makes me tick. Maybe one of the reasons why the business and I kind of outgrew each other. I know I outgrew the business is because I've started to learn that money isn't everything. And when I'm just doing something for the money, sure, there was a time when I first got in the business where traveling to all these clubs was so exciting. Going to new places all the time was so exciting. I mean, that time lasted me a good 20 years. But there gets to a point where it's not exciting. And then you're like, oh, darn, am I just doing this for a paycheck? And is this paycheck enough for the risk that I'm putting my health in front of on set, and I'm putting myself in front of late night at strip clubs where anything could go down, fights, shootings, what have you. I really started in my 40s to evaluate those two things. Those were two nagging voices. How long are you willing to roll the dice with your health and your safety and be in hotels on the road? And anything can happen, man. Weird stuff happens every day. So those voices, and now coming into something that's just like, I don't know, so fun and such a great escape. And, I love how adamant some broadcasters get about their team and how defensive they are. It's just something to bicker about that's not personal, doesn't really hurt anybody's feelings, but you can talk a lot of smack when you're doing fantasy sports.
And who are some of your influences that are in the, radio world? Who do you look up to?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good one. There's so many within the channel that I really like. Like I love Evan Cohen and Mike Babchick from The Morning Man. I do a lot with them. And Evan has his way and he's incredibly intelligent, also works for ESPN Radio. And then Babs is kind of like goofy and fun and has his way. And there's two great hosts right there. I listen to Sarah Spain on ESPN every night. She's got a great show. She's a great female voice in sports. I like her a lot. There's a lot of people that I watch and I don't really know if I love or I dislike that. Like sometimes I look at Stephen A. Smith and I'm like, okay, you're over the top with this. But then sometimes I'm like, but you watch the Stephen A. Smith show. Like it's just one of these weird emotional things. You can't really realize why, but there's just hosts that are great at what they do, when it comes to calling games. And so I listen to a lot and I try to keep it balanced with a male and a female sports voice because there's definitely a lack of female voices in sports radio. And that's another reason why I feel it's such a great fit for me because there aren't a lot of women talking fantasy baseball.
And what are you working on now that you're excited about over the next couple of months? Do you have anything coming up that you're particularly excited about? I know the NFL draft is coming up in April.
Well, yeah, the kind people at Pandora, Sirius and Pandora are now one, are going to be working with me to put my podcast back out there. So the Lisa Ann Experience is coming back to life. And super cool beans. I'll be able to do it at the same studios that I work at already. So it's not even a commute. I have access to more guests and incredible, producers. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about finishing my book. And then I'd like to set a goal to write a book a year, just like a short book, like a fun book. I've written serious books for so long, like this first book about myself. This is a serious book about myself. But I kind of want to take on some silly little topics and have fun with them. And whether they be, lifestyle, travel, whether they'd be diet, fitness, whether they just be sexual stories or, sexual adventures. I want to just be able to just be like, you can do this once a year. It's not that difficult. And get in the rhythm of it. There's some great writers that just put out something fun, something quippy, a good vacation book, silly things.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, you've written so much, and I think that doing a book a year is a great goal to set for anybody, So I wish you the best of luck with that, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. My last question for you is, what is something you know now that you wish you knew when you started?
Oh. It's tough because one of the things I knew when I started doing anything from a woman that grew up next door to me was being kind will get you everything. And I've carried that with me, and even at the clubs when people that worked at the clubs were not nice to me. I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna be nice to these people. Being kind really does help. But something I wish I knew then, money isn't everything. And having it is great, but it doesn't change who you are. I went through a phase where I had a lot of money and then I lost a ton of money in court and I was the same person. And that situation really made me realize money isn't everything. So if there's a job you really, as a freelancer, if there's a job that you get that feeling where you don't say yes right away and you really don't want to do it, and you start saying to yourself, oh, I should just take it because I don't have anything else the next week. Don't take those jobs. Don't share your skill set with those jobs. Take that time to work for yourself that day. I wish I would have done that more because I could have worked on written another book. I could have been blogging every day. I could have been doing my own podcasts. But instead I was taking jobs for the money because I felt like my schedule had to be full. When really, if you don't spend a lot of money and you're not living beyond your means, those extra days home working on your own content, maybe re-editing something or finding something you have never had edited and saying, let's put this together. We don't look through our hard drives enough. We don't go through our past experiences enough. We're just always pushing forward. So yeah, I wish I knew to say no to those jobs and to work on myself on those days.
Wow, that's great advice for me personally. I definitely have worked on a few jobs recently for the money and I haven't enjoyed it. I'm 8, 9, 10 edits deep of different drafts of these certain projects. And I'm like, why did I sign up for this in the first place? I could have been doing so much better things with my time, So thank you for that advice.
I think that's when we start to allow ourselves to be defeated, because each time you take a job you really didn't love, it sucks the energy out of you. And the whole time you're there or you're doing it, you're saying to yourself, why did I do this? Oh, I can't wait till this is over. I don't want to do anything anymore that I'm saying I can't wait till this is over. I want everything I do to run over and me be like, oh my gosh, we're done already. Like, that's who we should strive to be. And it's easy in this world be like, oh, the more money I have saved, the better, the more everything's going to be better. But man, I don't want to surrender. And you're kind of surrendering, and then you don't like doing the tail end of the project. You don't like anything about it. And why? So yes, Kay, say no. You're so talented, and you are so incredibly inspiring, and you are so self-motivated and so unbelievable that I just don't really think that anybody should get a moment of your time unless you feel like, yes, I want this gig. I understand, though. We all have to pay bills. I get it. But if you can do without it and budget, then say, I'll budget instead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I appreciate all of your insight over the years. And, you've been a very valuable friend in my life. And I'm very, very grateful to have known you and to have gotten to work and travel with you as well. So thank you for every opportunity that you've provided me with. And I can't wait to work again with you in the future and do much more content creation with you.
Agreed. And I have to tell you something, you've made me better. You've made me better because you're so proactive with your work. I'm from a different generation. We get done with our work and we go and do nothing for the night. You get done with your work and you continue to work on it. And so I've realized when I have an experience, I go home and blog that day. Because the next day it's not as great, the blog. And I went to see a Broadway show. And that day when I was walking home with my friend, I'm like, she's like, oh, let's just sit down and relax for a little bit. I said, okay, I want to write. Just take me like 20 minutes. I wrote it right away. And that's because of you. You taught me that. And you've given me so many better habits because you're so much more technology savvy than me. And you've also inspired me to do things like get a GoPro, which I love, and, do things myself. I'm much better with organizing my hard drives because you should know that I've picked up a lot from you, and you've also made me a lot better.
So that was my episode with Lisa Ann. I'm going to put a link to her store, her shop, in the description for you guys, as well as her social media. Be sure to follow her and check out what she's working on. Pick up a copy of her book. And when you're done with that, pick up a copy of my book, No Tracers, An Urban Explorer's Diary. No, but seriously, if you guys want to keep supporting me, you can actually head to patreon.com/justtheletterk. Over there on the Patreon, you will get perks to things like early access to my content, which means early access to this podcast, early access to my YouTube videos, my original music that I have coming out. I also send you high-res photos that you can print out yourself. And I've loved interacting with my Patreon supporters. We've been doing Skype sessions every month, and that's one of my favorite things to do over there on Patreon. So if you guys want to get early access and exclusive perks like that, head over to patreon.com/justtheletterk. A link will be in the description. But I will talk to you guys next week for another episode of Project Freelance. If you enjoyed this, please leave a rating and some feedback. And if you leave feedback, I will actually send you a signed photo print free of charge. Just got to leave feedback. It's free, and you can do it in like 30 seconds. So yeah, it helps the podcast grow and it helps me out. So I appreciate that. Thanks for leaving your feedback and letting other people know what you like about this podcast. All right, guys, stay strong, keep enduring, go out and go create something.